I just unplugged it and started switching machines in and out, which you just wouldn't do that to another man's gear. I guess the first thing I remember about Glenn is his mom, Joni, because I had done at least one session, maybe two, for her. And it was, relatively standard Southern gospel stuff. And I know we had done one of them at Miller's Creek at Marshall Craven's studio, Star Recording. I hadn't done a session for her in a while, and she called me up and she said, my son is graduating from educational place that you go to learn engineering. She said, I want him to be in on the session, at least on the mix. I said, okay. I thought, well, if he doesn't know the equipment here, because it was like every regional studio, everybody had their own bag, their own type of console and all that. He may be a little uncomfortable trying to mix. But we went ahead and did it. And the funny thing about the session, and this leads up to Glenn, because the history of that session, it was a 3-day session. It was a Christmas album. So they had done their stuff, and we had really spent a lot of time cramming it into a 3-day thing. We were working late nights, and it was getting a little comical late at night, and I remember the background vocalist had a time element they had to be in charge of. So Roger is standing there with his finger on the talkback button, and he's talking to Joni because the background singers had just done a cut with her lead vocal. And the ending chord of this thing, she wanted a high-pitched voice over theirs to sing the last note. And so she's going to do it. And Roger was advising against it. He said, I don't really think it needs it. Well, Joni's pretty headstrong about it. She knew what she wanted. And so she went at it a couple times, and it wasn't happening the way she wanted it to happen, and she lit into it again. Roger had his finger on the talkback button, so her phones were activated, and he turned around to Marshall or somebody, and he said, I hope she gets this time. This is just wearing me out. She said, I heard that, Roger Talley. So this all colored the session. Well, we finally got all this stuff down. And Glenn comes in on the 3rd day. We've got a day scheduled for a mix. This album needed 2 or 3 days to mix. And I'm thinking, well, here comes this kid. He doesn't know these machines. They were digital machines that had to be synced with each other. This was in the heyday of digital tape, which I'm glad came and went, because you only had 8 tracks per machine, and if you wanted a standard 24-track session, you had to have 3 of these machines stacked up, and they had to sync up with each other, and they would lose sync every now and then. And the Tascams, they had some little glitches that they hadn't quite gotten worked out. These were brand new machines, and one machine might just stop, and the other 2 keep going. Well, you see what that does to your cut. Marshall, the owner of the studio, had bought 3 more machines. So he had 6 of these machines, and he had them stacked up back in the back room in case he needed a new one to put in the stack. So the session's over. Here comes Glenn on the 3rd day, young fella. If he'd ever mixed anything like a Southern gospel record, I don't know of it. I don't think he had. I'm sure they'd trained him in mixes down there. But Southern gospel's like everything else. It's a pretty specialized sound, and you need to be, I know his mom sang it. I don't know how much he listened to it up to that time. So Glenn, still being in college, he was green to this stuff. He had a lot of technical things that he'd learned, but I don't think he'd ever mixed anything like a Southern gospel record, even though his mom sang that stuff a lot. And so he just came in to mix, and all of us left. I asked Joni, I said, does he need any help? Nope, just let him go ahead. Well, that was the 3rd day we were working. And if I remember right, I left about 1 o'clock in the day, and I went on home and did whatever I was going to do. I drove back by there, 11 o'clock that night, and Glenn's car was there. Lights were on, and I didn't go in. I figured, well, he's about done. So I went by there the next day to see how things were going. And apparently, he had been up all night long, and he's still mixing. And he wanted me to come in and see how things were going. And so I listened, and it was not a bad mix, but it was different because he had some really strange things going on in the panning. Had all the background vocals on one side there for a little bit. But what happened was, and he told me, he said, Marshall went to bed, and he said, I was out here by myself, and he said, I knew I had to mix this thing some way. He said, I found 3 more machines in the back room, and he said, one of these kept messing up. So he said, I just unplugged it and started switching machines in and out, which you just wouldn't do that to another man's gear. But what impressed me with Glenn is that he didn't bother anybody. He just took the tools he had right there at the time and made this session happen. And at the end of the allotted time, he had her a mix. Now, Joni was never going to be satisfied with the first effort at something. She wants you to go the extra mile, and she didn't have a whole lot of mercy on her son either. She worked him as hard as she worked the rest of us. And I think she called back and she wanted a few things remixed, but the bottom line was nothing slowed him down. He got a mix. It was not a bad mix. He used all the tools that he had access to and made it happen, and he didn't have to call on a bunch of people to nursemaid him through this thing. And as near as I can tell in the years that I've known Glenn since then, he is very ahead of the game. If he wants to do something, he just does it. He gets his material together. He gets his knowledge base together. He talks to whoever he's got to talk to, but at the end of the day, he's the one that's going to be doing the work. He's the one that's had to make the investment. And look what the studio and its legacy is one of somebody that is very, very proactive in what they do and what they believe about the industry. And I think that's why he's been successful. I think that's why all the people here, the family that runs this is a family-owned business and a family-run business. And that is rare in this day and time. You just don't see it. That work ethic is what makes this place work. That's what makes it happen.